game, walking in the woods. You have to explore the woods and collect the magical mushrooms to escape. Here the player starts off in their house and collide with all little objects and move behind things as well. And you leave the house. You can explore this little wooded area up here as well. Move behind more things and collide with the solid stuff. Makes it kind of feel almost 3D. Move down the way, go exploring. There's some enemies that animate and move around. Collide with them. You get sent back to the spawn point where you came in. Move down. There's the first of the mushrooms you need to find to escape. So there's the first 4. Go through this doorway down the bottom to the next part of the woods. Should be able to find the next few. The game's slow to load, but I'd fix that in future versions. Now we're in the next area. Mushrooms should have spawned in this section of the map. I can find them. There's one. Another. Oh, if the enemies hit you in here, they send you to those points rather than back to the first scene. Just find the rest of the mushrooms. Get the game to end. Should just be 1 or 2 more up this top corner. There we go. And then it goes back to the UI for the win screen. So the way it all works is going to show you each different thing's got kind of got a controller on it. So the first one's the player controller, being the main part of the game. So the first part of the controller that I built was decide if the player's moving, so and what direction they're moving in. So all this code here, all of this part here, is determining if the player's moving and then what direction to move them in. So when you push the arrow keys, it sets a number to either 0.5f or minus 0.5f, and then if it's the left and right keys, you're doing that on. If the value's like 0.5, it'll move them left. If it's minus, it'll move them right. And then the same for up and down. So it's like assigning a value to each of the buttons, and then from that value, it knows what way to move. And then the animator down here just latches onto that. If he's moving, if the input is horizontal or the input is vertical, then move the character in that way. Then it also has a last move. It remembers the last direction the player faced so that it can leave the player facing in that direction. There's also this little bit of code here on the player controller. This little bit up here is when you go into a new area, it creates a duplicate of the player. What this does is it deletes the duplicates when you go into the new area, so there's always only the one true player that you started off with rather than these little duplicate animations of him. And the last bit of code in here is this little score counter. So what this does is when there's 1 score for the mushrooms in the first area, which when that equals 40, and there's 1 score for the mushrooms in the second area, which needs to equal 80. So when the scores are 40 and 80, and you have all the mushrooms across both areas, it destroys the game object for the player, and it pops up saying you win. It moves you to the end game scene. The next part is the camera controller, which is a lot simpler because the camera controller just does this little bit down here which moves the camera. So the camera always follows the player. The camera has the same movement speed as what the player does. So when the player moves, the camera follows the player exactly, and that's why the player can't really walk out of the map anywhere. The camera's always directly on top, you're always center screen. And then the same as before with the player, the camera has this bit here that stops it being duplicated when it goes into each new place. So when the player moves through, the camera follows them through, and this stops you having two cameras and them clashing with each other. The next bit is the enemies, and I've got two scripts for the enemies, but they're both pretty much identical. There's only slight differences. So there's enemies for scene 1, which are the script, and enemies for scene 3, which are the script. So they move randomly, and within the random movements, there's intervals between the movements. So they move a random distance in a random direction, then they sit for a random amount of time, and then they repeat that. But all those randoms are within set ranges, so they're not going to like idly sit there forever and might never move. They always will move, but you just don't roughly know when. So this is all the code here explaining the randomization of that, with my interval counters and everything to decide what way is it going to go, when's it going to go, and then how long is it going to sit for once it's there. Finally, down the bottom here, there's a collision. So when the enemy collides with the player, it returns the player to these set coordinates. So these are the coordinates for in scene 3, and this is the main difference. But the only difference between these two scripts is because in the other one, it sends them to the coordinates in scene 1. In future versions of the game, if I had more time to develop it, I would get that to work so that there was only one script to control that whole type of enemy, and it wouldn't matter what scene they were in, it would be able to distinguish, but I didn't know how to do that at the time, and if I could keep developing, I would clean my code up more and make that work. The next bit is the player start. So when you move into new areas, this kind of controls where you're going to end up in those areas as well. So when you go through a doorway, it uses the load new area script and the player start script together to pick where you're going to end up starting in the new scene. So when you walk through the house door at the very beginning of the game, there's a string of text attached to the doorway you're going out of, and then a string of text attached to the spawn point that you spawn in on. And when those are the same, it knows which spawn point to send you to. So every doorway has a string for going into it and a string for where you end up on the other side in both directions. So the game always knows where to send you. And then there's the last move again piece here for it knows what way to have you facing once you go through. So if you go through a door sideways, you come out facing the same way, so you don't face the wrong direction when you come out. So it kind of makes it all feel a little more organic, and it drags the camera through with it as well. Down here, things get a little bit more complicated though. This is for spawning in the enemies. So the game needs to check we're in the same scene so that it's not going to constantly respawn enemies over and over and over again. So it would just fill the game with enemies in a second, because the update function refreshes every second. So every time it updates, it would respawn 8 enemies or 10 enemies even. So what it does is it checks if the scene that we're currently in is the same name as the previous scene, and if the scene we're currently in is the same as the previous scene, we've not changed the scene. If it's different, we've changed the scene. So from that, it has to then spawn the enemies. So every time we go into an area, there's only 8. And the enemies can spawn randomly within this range. So anywhere between minus 26 and minus 12x, and anywhere between minus 8 and minus 17y, the enemies can spawn when they're in level 3. Then when you're in level 1, any place between -14 and -2x and -4 and -18y spawn. Here's the load new area script that I was talking about, where it finds the player and moves them to the string of the level that he's loaded, basically. Here is the gen, well, it was originally called gen pickups, but it's the picking up of the mushrooms. So the way that works is there's a random range, which is this here, which is anywhere within this range the mushrooms can spawn. So from that, there's an array of spawn points, so it knows make all these spawn points within this range, and then attach the pickup prefab to that. So the prefab is the mushroom. So then it randomizes these 8 spawn points, and then it throws a mushroom down on each one. And that's that whole bit. And I've got my other spawner. The other spawner is the exact same script, it's just that the ranges are different because it's the one for scene 1 again, whereas that gen pickup worked for scene 3. Again, if I could clean this up in the way that I had the 2 controllers for the enemies, I would, so that's like a future thing to add. I've then got the pickup script where when the player collides with the mushroom, checks for the collision, checks that it's the player that's collided, and then calls in the player script, adds 10 to the player score, and then destroys the mushroom. So then it just gets rid of that little animation for the mushroom. The sprite, sorry, not an animation. Again, pickup 2, the only difference on this script is that it's called count rather than score, and that was so that I had a quick way of making it work where there was 2 different types of mushroom and 2 different scenes, so that I wasn't just going to add everything to the same one, because I didn't know if it would carry the score into a new scene, so I just did 2 different variables to keep it simpler in my head. But again, future versions I would clean this up. And the last piece is just my menu controller, which is when the player hits start at the start of the game, it loads up scene 2, which is the player's house where the game begins. And that is my code. Don't think there's much more to say about the code, so future versions of the game, expand on the areas, tidy them up, definitely rework my art, so try and make the game load faster, optimize everything. Clean up my code that's already here, try and reduce it, get it into fewer scripts because there's too many, I would say, just now. And after that, add other enemy types, better missions than just picking things up, more entertaining and engaging things for the player to do. But beyond that, I think I'm done here.